Welcome back. In the last few steps, we looked at a lot of details related to a transaction. We saw how queries are being fired to the database in the background. This is a quick review video where we would take an in-depth look at what happens in a transaction, what happens behind the screens. When does the changes you make to your entities get saved to the database? And what are the different tips and tricks that you would need to know? Let's get started. Let's take some simple method, right? So this method is making a change to the database. So let's say it's creating a couple of users, it's trying to persist them, and then it makes changes to the user 1 and the user 2. We saw that when something of this kind happens, both the insert queries get fired, so the user 1 and user 2 are inserted, and also the update queries get fired. So the update queries to make the changes which we make. So if I'm changing the user 1 age, then those update queries are also fired. The important thing to notice is when do these queries get fired? The most important thing you would see is Hibernate waits until the last possible moment before it would start persisting the changes. So the transaction starts here because we put a transactional in here, right? So we made this part of a transaction. The transaction starts here and it ends here. So it starts on line 17 and ends on line 27. So whatever changes you are trying to make, Hibernate will wait until the last possible moment before it saves them to the database. That is a really efficient thing to do, because if let's say some of the updates failed, what we want to do, if let's say the update we do on 24 fails, then what we want to do is, because this whole thing is part of one transaction, we would want to roll back all the changes. Hibernate says, why do I need to roll back? Hibernate says, by default, I will try and have all the changes with me. I will try and manage all the changes by myself. When I do em.persist user1, the only thing which gets fired is a sequence to assign a ID to user1. So ID is assigned to user1, but the real user1 will not be saved to the database. em.persist user2, and ID is assigned to user2, but the real user2 is not saved to the database yet. You make a change, user1.age is equal to something. Then the change, because the user1 is part of the persistence context, user1 is being tracked by the entity manager, so it's part of the persistence context. You're making a change to user1, so the persistent context recognizes the fact that, okay, this guy is changing user1, this guy is changing user2, so I have to send an update. So persistence context keeps track of the changes. By the time it comes to line 26, it will say, okay, I have to insert user 1, I have to insert user 2. There's a modification on user 1 on this line, and there's a modification on user 2 on this line. But it does not really save them down to the database. The actual inserts happen after the entire transaction is completed. So it's at this phase that all changes are saved down to the database. Always remember, Hibernate waits until the last possible moment before saving down all changes to your database. I would recommend you to try a simple example. So you can try a simple example, take one of the examples which we worked on earlier, and try and revise and make sure that you understand this concept. So even though I'm making a change in here, this change does not really go to the database until the last line is executed. Last line in that transaction is executed. Is that the only way to do things? Nope. If you really want to push some of the changes to the database, you can say em.flush. So a flush would push all the changes that you made until then down to the database. So here I have inserted 2 users. So what would happen? These queries are fired down to the database. There are 2 ways you can make your changes go to the database. One is to call the flush, then those changes are sent down to the database. The query is sent to the database, so the insert queries for user 1 and user 2 are sent to the database on line 23 right now. The important thing for you to understand is the fact that even though I'm doing a flush here, let's say there is a change user 1 and this update fails. So let's say the update Hibernate does to this user 1 fails. Even though I have flushed to the database, what Hibernate does is it will roll back every change that I have done before that. So Hibernate, even if I do a flush, Hibernate would ensure that all the changes that are made before this are rolled back. In this quick video, until now, the most important point we discussed is that Hibernate waits until the last possible moment, until the end of the transaction before it sends the update and the insert queries down to the database, except when we say entity manager dot flush. I'll see you in the next step.